No matter who you are, it's up to you to create your own legacy.
No, I am your father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum!
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Welcome back to another episode of Easily Entertained. I'm your host, Bryson, and here we talk about all things entertaining. Today we are talking about Creed 3, or well, the Creed movies kind of in general. So if you don't know what the Creed movies are, they are a spin-off to the Rocky series, so they are a boxing series of movies. It is based on, I think, kind of the first three, Rocky movies that have Apollo Creed in them, because the main character of Creed is the son of Apollo Creed, Adonis Creed, or Donnie. And in this series, it kind of follows his hero's journey. He was the result of an affair that Apollo had while he was fighting, I believe. And so he kind of felt a bit discarded. He was in foster homes and youth centers from a young age until his adoptive mom, who was actually Apollo Creed's wife, kind of adopted him. She realized that the child existed, that Apollo had that affair, and decided after he died to make those amends in a way, and adopted Adonis and raised him as her own. So now she's basically his mom anyways. So the whole story kind of follows Adonis's journey. And in the first movie, it's very much it's a typical underdog story. He comes in, he's originally trying to make his own name for himself. He doesn't want to use the Creed name. He uses his birth mother's name, who is Johnson. So he's going through and he wants to make his own name for himself as that. And he gets in and he starts fighting people who are up for the title. But what ends up happening is they find out his real parentage, and so they then have to use that name, and then they go from underdog and he goes straight to the title to make for the reigning champion have a good last fight because he's going to retire. So that movie, it's kind of coming to terms with your own identity is what that one is kind of about. It is a typical hero's journey, underdog type story. He gets trained by Rocky, although Rocky is a little bit hesitant at first. He's like, I don't know. And then he's like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to take it seriously. And so that's where that ends up going. And Rocky trains Adonis to become a fantastic fighter. And so we get that kind of story. So that first movie is very much coming to terms with your identity. He can have his own name for himself while also still being related to the most famous boxer the world has ever seen, at least according to these movies. And then you have the second movie where he fights one of Apollo's old opponents, well, the son of one of his old opponents, as well as Rocky's, because they fight, what's his name? Victor Drago, who's the son of Ivan Drago, who fought Apollo Creed in a previous movie and died. And so Rocky had come back and defeated him, kind of to avenge Apollo in a way. And so in that movie, it is all about Donnie being broken down by the same kind of dude that broke down his father. And so it kind of feels like he's falling back into something like history repeating itself. He feels like he could lose, he could die, he could lose everything. And so in this movie, he has to beat that. He has to go beyond what others could do and make his own name and his own legacy for himself. You're kind of probably seeing a trend here. And then this third movie, what had happened, so Donnie is retired, and he gets visited by an old friend when he was in youth homes. What's his name? Damien. And in that one, Damien had gone to jail because of like a altercation that they had from someone at the youth homes. Not at the youth homes, but from someone from there. They had met out in public, and he had treated them really bad, and so they beat him up, and then Damien had gone to jail for it. And so it's kind of interesting because we get him coming back, and at first they're all like super chummy. They're like, oh, this is great. It's so good to see you. Donnie wants to help him get back into things, and Damien really wants to be a fighter. That was always his dream, and although he's a bit older now, that doesn't bother him. He's like, okay, let's get right into this. I want to be the champ. And Donnie is a little bit hesitant, and then he gives him his shot after someone is unable to attend a fight, which which Donnie was supporting a champion, or like an upcoming champion for the title. And because of them not being able to fight, they had an opponent who couldn't fight. They get Damien to substitute. They figure, oh, this will be entertaining. Donnie can just put his name on this and be like, oh, yeah, we're just supporting this underdog who we've known before, so let's try it out. It'll make for a good show at least. And then Damien beats the champion, like bar none. It is like not even close. He whoops him. And so then all this is kind of blown out of proportion because this is not what was supposed to happen. It was supposed to be like just a fun, like a good fight that would kind of just spark some interest and not create a new champion. And so there comes that, and then you have Donnie who is then being called out because he supported Damien getting in. He was like, yeah, this will be just fine. We can put him in for an underdog fight. It'll make for a great show. And then it all goes south, and people are like, whoa, Donnie, what have you done? You kind of just gave the championship to this random person. And so it makes for an interesting story because then after he's getting called out, Damien is kind of calling him out because Donnie went and lived the dream that Damien really wanted. And so Donnie now feels like he has to defend this title. He has to, once again, make his own legacy. He has to beat the up-and-comer. He has to defeat that opponent that is relating to his own past. A lot of this series is very much a coming to terms with your past and not letting that define you, letting you create your own legacy. It's a big overarching theme, even in the Rocky movies as well. It has kind of just been a result of this series. Because if you think the Rocky movies, you think Rocky Balboa, who is this underdog who was never really in professional fighting, but then he's given his first shot in the first movie where he fights the champion, the best boxer in the entire world. He fights Apollo Creed and he beats him. And then you have the second movie where he does it again. He made his own legacy. He didn't ride on someone's name. He wasn't relying on fame. It was just who he was, and he beat the reigning champion. And in these movies, it's a similar thing. However, it's about still connecting with your past while making your own legacy. Because of Donnie being related to Apollo Creed, sadly, that name will now always follow him now that that's out. And Donnie does not particularly care for that. However, he understands he can't escape it now, but he can still do everything himself. He's not relying on fame. He did all this training, all this hard work. He worked with Rocky and the son of his dad's old trainer. They all together can provide that own legacy. And I think that's something that's super interesting about these movies, is because of them being sports type movies, it can only go so many ways. Things can be very predictable when it comes to sports movies. There are a lot of movies that have those similar kind of tropes. It's the hero's journey, it's the underdog versus the champion, or vice versa. It's like the reigning champion defending his title. It's all pretty samey. It's predictable. You kind of know what's going to happen. Of course, the main character is going to win at the end. It's that typical hero's journey story. However, it is good to understand that is a trope and play it to their advantage. They understand that everyone knows that Creed is going to win in these movies. His name is on the movies. It's just like Rocky. They know this character, although he's going to have his ups and downs, he might be beaten to the core. He might be on the verge of dying. He may be within an inch of death. But you know he's going to win. But that tension is still there, because there is this slight, I wouldn't exactly say hope, but sort of. It's just a slight thought that this main character, someone who has worked so hard and fought for this position in their lives, could still lose. Like, you know, they're powerful and they're strong. They could still lose. I think movies that took that hero's journey and kind of flipped it on its head, especially like Avengers Infinity War, where the heroes lose, you don't exactly expect that. You expect the heroes to win. In this, you expect Donnie to win. In the first movie, he did win. He took all that training. He got unconventional training from Rocky. They worked really hard to get where they're at. And then you have, in the second movie, he's beaten at the beginning. He faces Victor Drago, and Victor is disqualified, but he was beaten. His ribs were broken. He is just beaten to the core. He's on the mat for the first time, where like he stayed there. He didn't get back up. They all thought he was going to die. And then he comes back. But it's those kind of moments that you can still be excited for. It's that tension. You know what's going to happen. You know the character's going to win. But still seeing that tension and feeling how much this character has that drive to win and still wants to prove to others and himself that they're worthy. That is what makes for a good story of a hero's journey. It's them building that own legacy. It is predictable. Everyone will understand it. And that's why they get made. It's because they're easy to understand. People know what's coming. But you can still use that to tell a compelling story. It doesn't have to be some artistic type thing to make you understand some deeper meaning about the world. I do like those kind of movies that are more like you have to think about them more, but it's good to still have these hero journey type stuff, and you can use things to make it work really well. I think in this one, the cinematography especially is incredible. They have really good slow motion shots. They have some impressive angles and music to further drive this story. I think it's impressive the way they do it. And it's actually really interesting because in this movie, they didn't have Rocky in it. And they don't even acknowledge it in the third movie, which I found kind of interesting, and I learned a bit more later on why that was the case. So, if you didn't know, in the first two Creed movies, Rocky is in them and he trains Adonis. He kind of uses his own boxing experience to train Donnie to get him to fight these opponents who he's never faced before. He's only ever done like amateur stuff. And so Rocky kind of, I think, feeling some guilt for Apollo Creed and him losing and dying to Ivan Drago. Rocky kind of feels guilty and wants to make amends for that. And so he does train Adonis eventually after a lot of pestering. But it's interesting. And in the last movie, in Creed 3, he is not there. They don't acknowledge him. They aren't like, oh, he went into retirement. That's what they kind of wanted to imply, was that he's getting old and he can't do all this stuff anymore. That's kind of what they led into with the other movies. And so it's kind of what you think has happened, but they never outright say it, and they don't hint at it. They don't have like a call to Adonis making it think that it's like Rocky wishing him good luck or things like that. They don't ever have that in this movie. And I found out why. So I don't remember his name, but some guy purchased the rights to the Rocky movies after Creed 2, I believe. But with that meant they couldn't use Rocky as a character in this last Creed movie. They had already used it and the movies were released well before this contract had appeared. But so that's why he could be in the first two movies. But I believe the contract had been signed and created after Creed 2. So they couldn't get Rocky as a character into this movie. I do think that they tried, but they weren't able to do that just because I don't think it aligned with the contract. And so they didn't get Sylvester Stallone. They didn't have that connection, that like family aspect to it that I felt really drived the first two movies. I thought the movie was great. I'm not going to lie. I loved Creed 3. I do think it was probably the best in the series, or close to. I personally really liked Creed 2. I think that one was really good, but I think they're contending for the number one spot. But anyways, so essentially they couldn't get Sylvester Stallone to play Rocky because it was against the terms of that contract. However, like in interviews and stuff, like Michael B. Jordan was kind of sad that they couldn't get him back, and Sylvester Stallone does not feel any regret. He doesn't feel any disdain for Michael B. Jordan for still making this third one, and it's interesting. But I think Rocky not being in Creed 3 really cements the building your own legacy theme of the entire trilogy. And I think that is because he was in the first two movies and he was training Adonis. However, Apollo Creed and Rocky were kind of close, at least at the end. So they kind of had that connecting legacy to them. And so it still almost felt like Adonis was still following in the legacy of someone else. And so having Rocky not be in this last one cemented the idea that Donnie could make his own legacy. He didn't have to rely on Rocky. He didn't have to rely on his father. He could do it all himself, obviously with the help of a trainer, but that's not the point. He cemented that he could make his own name. He could do it all himself. He could complete those accomplishments for himself, for his friends, for his family, for his mentors. That is what made that typical hero's journey so compelling. Because you didn't know how it was going to end. Donnie was going to win. But it's that theme of taking what has come before and still learning from it and having respect for your past and coming to terms with it, but not letting it define who you are, and being your own person, making your own decisions and choices and deciding who you want to be with your life and letting others decide who they want to be. It's making their own legacy and his own legacy, which made it such a compelling story. And so that is why I think Creed 3 and really the whole Creed series is so compelling, even though it is a typical hero's journey. You know what's going to happen. It's predictable. That's kind of just the case with hero's journeys and sports stories. You can only tell them so many ways. But it's utilizing that kind of theme to still drive the story and utilize and taking that basic story of a hero's journey, rising and falling and then rising again, even bigger. It's taking that and expanding on it and using other things to drive it, which makes it such a good movie. And so that's why I really liked Creed 3 and the whole Creed series as a whole. If you haven't watched it yet, you should. Hopefully you've already watched it, but it is a good series, and I think you watching would make you pretty easily entertained. Thank you for listening to Easily Entertained with me, Bryson. If you enjoyed, be sure to tune back in Tuesdays at 5 p.m. at Mountain Standard Time. We're available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And for all the latest updates on anything entertaining, check us out on social media on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. And until next time, this is Easily Entertained.